Hey everybody, Matty here. Before we begin this episode proper, I just want to relay some information real quick. So usually at this point in the podcast, you are hearing me do our little Patreon pre-rolls telling you to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/IndieHeadsPodcast, because, usually for Patreon supporters, you're getting your episodes 48 hours early, and we do promise to keep that sort of exclusivity period for the rest of our episodes going forward. However, today we are making an exception because this is episode 1 of the Death Grips Discog Breakdown, where we're talking about Exmilitary, and we are releasing this on the day that Exmilitary turns 10. And so to make sure that, everyone gets to hear this episode on the day of the anniversary, well, we are lifting our exclusivity period just for this episode and this episode only, because it's goddamn Death Grips Exmilitary. It is a amazing, great, all-time classic mixtape, and we just want to be able to celebrate with everybody. So Patreon supporters, people who listen to us on Spotify, on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, wherever you get your podcast, we are putting this out today, April 25th, for everyone to enjoy, because Exmilitary is a great album, and we have a great podcast ahead discussing it. Myself, Jackie, and special guest Jade. It's going to be a good episode. Hopefully you all enjoy it. And if you want to support us on Patreon, though, of course, it's patreon.com/IndieHeadsPodcast, as our Discord server as of late has really been popping off. It's super fun every day going in there and talking music and other things with our fans and friends. And if you want to join patreon.com/IndieHeadsPodcast, it's only $1 a month. But actually, though, before we begin this episode proper, I do want to thank our Real Ones patrons, including Boocanan, Maiorino, Grant McSpooky, Dave Grohl, Darien Fisher, Cal50, Alec Grichmanoff, Melissa Rettig, Lily Makowski, Tony Disarufino, Chris Wade, Selectric, David Culbert, Maizefarms, Bex, Georgia Makowski, Rachel Hartman, Noah Kurtz, Waffle113, Alex Bielovich, Alec Feldherr, Adam Edwards, Jackson Crist, Elizabeth, and Derrick Pemberton. And if you want to join the Real Ones patrons, of course, you can support us for $5 a month or more on patreon.com/IndieHeadsPodcast, as you will get bonus episodes and get a shout out at the top of the pod. Anyways, though, enjoy this episode.
He come to me with money in his hand. He offered me. I didn't ask him. I wasn't knocking someone's door down. I was running from that. When I got out, I was in that. I was already through that. I had that. I had the studio. I went to the studio, went to Vox Studios. I had it all, and I looked at it, and I said, this is a bigger jail than I just got out of. I don't want to take my time going to work. I got a motorcycle and a sleeping bag and 10 or 15 girls. What the hell I want to go off and go to work for? Work for what? Money? I got all the money in the world. I'm the king, man. I run the underworld, guy. I decide who does what and where they do it at. What am I going to run around and act like I'm some teeny bopper somewhere for somebody else's money? I make the money, man. I roll the nickels. The game is mine. I deal the cards.
Hello, everybody, and welcome officially to the Death Grips Discog Breakdown. I am one of your co-hosts, Matty at @MoviandPrince on Twitter. Of course, I am joined on this episode by my fellow co-host. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would love to. So first of all, we are banking these episodes up. So if you're listening to this now, you're listening to this in the future by the magic of time travel. Today, for the record, just to get it, I'm sure this will come up, but this is the day that Prince Philip passed away, just for timekeeping purposes. But through the magic of podcast time traveling, by the time you hear this, I will be out as transgender, which is super fucking cool. And I'm super excited about it, and especially excited to not have to be referred to exclusively as horse jeans on this podcast. Hello, I am Jackie, Jacqueline, Jackie for short. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm just so fucking excited, to be out, but also more importantly, to have my very first podcast out be this one, talking about one of the fucking best albums ever. So I am just through the moon about it, and very excited that I get to be out as myself on this podcast. And if you are reading this, if you're listening to this, you probably follow me on Twitter and you've probably seen my coming out letter by now. But just in case you don't, you can go check it out at horse_jeans on twitter.com. It'll be up by the time you hear this over there. So yeah, thank you to all my lovely friends who have been so supportive and have been so enthusiastic and cooperative with allowing me to continue to do the podcast while not yet being out. And I love you guys so much, and I'm so excited to be doing this podcast with Matty and all my friends.
Yes. Well then, before we actually get into the album itself, let's introduce our guests. Our guests for this first episode of the Death Grips Discog Breakdown, we have on good friend of mine, Jade Gomez of Paste, various other places. What are you doing currently? And welcome to the pod, finally.
Thank you so much for having me, and also shout out to Jackie. Wait, can you guys hear me?
Thank you. We can.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay,
I can hear you.
Good. Just making sure. But yeah, shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for having me. But yeah, I'm rambling because I've never really done this before. But yeah, I work at Paste Magazine. Just recently started as assistant music editor, which is really surreal and really exciting. I was a freelance writer before this. I mod the Death Grip subreddit, albeit very horribly, because modding subreddits is a very, very hard, and it's like a full-time job in itself sometimes.
Oh yeah,
you know, Matt, and
yeah.
And I love my dog. You might hear her in the background for all you wonderful listeners, because she has no concept of personal space or boundaries. And I can't wait to talk about one of my favorite bands with you all.
Hell yeah.
Alrighty. So I guess the first question we have for you then is, how did you get into Death Grips?
So I don't really know exactly how. I believe it was right after Exmilitary came out. Right after Exmilitary came out, it came out in 2011. I was about 12 years old, I want to say. And I was like really involved in like the weird recesses of the internet, both good and bad for all intents and purposes. And I believe it was through Tumblr, or if not Tumblr, it was Last FM, one or the other, because those were the two that I frequented a lot as I started to get more into my musical journey. And from first listen, it just completely blew my mind. It was around the time I was finally phasing out of, I was that kid who was like, I only listen to Led Zeppelin and nothing else because everything else sucks, and rap, are you talking about crap? And just, I was that kid. I was insufferable. And then Death Grips I was really heavily involved in the DIY punk scene in my town at the time. And I really loved how Death Grips was kind of got me back into hip hop in a way that I was kind of already familiar with the genres I listened to. And they opened my eyes to so many other things, and I got very heavily into a lot of more experimental rap and hip hop. And they became a huge part of my life after that. Funny story, after their first no-show in I believe it was Chicago, when they had the whole suicide note thing, I was the person who broke the news about that on a wider scale, and I was cited in a Pitchfork article when I was like 13, which is still it's still so funny to me. And yeah, I saw them for the first time when I was like 14 years old, which is weird, and I've made so many amazing friends that I'm still friends with to this day. We have like a whole little crew that goes to all the Death Grip shows whenever they come through the East Coast. And yeah, it's been like really rewarding, and I'm so glad to still be so involved and see people still get involved with such an amazing band all these years later.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is just I mean, even then, like, for better or for worse, and honestly sometimes really for worse at certain points, there was just such a large, like, expansive community behind this band. I feel like there's not many artists these days, like if we're talking like, you know, not like non-pop artists these days, that have such a fervent community around them, like that inspire like so much passion and so much just like drive of like, we gotta see this band, or like we gotta, you know, keep this band alive, essentially, you know, while we're sort of waiting between albums. Just just like, bro, like it's only right now on like a slight downs, you know, slight, like, Yeah, it's a little bit down, but even then, it's picking back up because obviously there's the AT or A2 B2 live stream that happened in the magazine, and then the remix he just did, Andy did, and then the Zach Hill remix, and it's like we're gearing up for something. I feel like it would be very nice at the end of the series to find out there's a new Death Grips album coming out, or they just drop a new one. But
and we talked about last episode that it was probably a good idea for them to take a break, because as much as like during the peak run it was so exhilarating that like every 9 months they would just completely like break your brain again, and it was so fun to watch. Like there becomes a point where that becomes like exhausting, especially because like we were starting to get the expectations on them, like okay, every single album has to completely change the thing. And now that they've had some time to like fully recharge, and I'm sure they probably were making music during the pandemic, but like now at whatever point they want to come back with a full length thing, I think there will have been some time that is elapsed that will allow people to get excited about it again. And I also think that like as we've talked about, like the fruits of the Death Grips influence have really, really started to blossom in the last 2 years, because like you were talking about, there's an entire generation of people our exact age who were 13, 14, 15, 12, somewhere in that range when Exmilitary came out, and those people's brains are just permanently warped forever. Like that has a lasting impact on us. And now you can see like in how many young musicians there are out there, that whether the influence is like very direct, like 100 gecs, where they're like clearly borrowing like sonic stylistic elements, or something even less obvious like Black Midi or like other bands, that it's like, okay, this band doesn't sound anything like Death Grips, but there's something about the approach that they take, something about some of the choices that they make, where you can tell like, oh, they're clearly influenced by how Death Grips has influenced like the independent online internet music scene in general. And I think that it's really exciting to get to talk about this album on its 10-year anniversary, because like it has aged like a fine wine, but also was like the moment that, for me, I think I talked about this last week, but like this was when Death Grips all of a sudden was, I wasn't as obsessed with them in 2011 as I became obsessed with them over time. But from my very first listen, I was like, okay, well, this is like nothing I've ever heard in my entire life before. And from there, I was at the very least intrigued before I got fully like pilled on them being as like, one of my favorite bands.
Definitely. Especially like when you think about how I think the community is such a huge part of it. And it's something that you very rarely see, in that the community in many ways, like I think they did it purposefully by making sure that they are as far removed from everything as possible, only literally releasing music and then stepping back, so that people are forced to create these things. It's almost like a weird psychological experiment in so many ways. Sorry, my boyfriend's dancing like Jimmy Jr. in the corner of my eye. But yeah, it's like most of my fondest memories on the internet was from the really strange things that Death Grips got up to. And a lot of it was like so strange. Like if you were part of the community, especially from I think around 2013 to 2016, when literally they thought everything was an ARG, no matter what.
Oh my God.
Down to like examining the HTML. Or my personal favorite, I believe it was when, I forgot whether it was when Government Plates or Powers That, I think it was when Powers That Be came out, they posted coordinates or something, and they were like, it was for a haunted road that is right by my house, Annie's Road, and they were saying it's like an urban legend, and then you're supposed to go there at night, and then there was, next thing you know, people being, I'm in New Jersey, I'm gonna drive over there right now, there might be a hidden Death Grips album, and then eventually it devolved into the point where they're like, maybe we're supposed to make Jenny Death ourselves, and it's just got, it's like,
oh my God,
it's like incredible, and they possess such a keen self-awareness, like they are well aware as to the hold that they have on this community. And I think that's something so unique that I don't think anybody else will ever be able to replicate as an artist. They've like really cornered that market, and it was done in such an organic way that I feel like it's so hard for it to be done in a different way without it seeming like a copy.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Like there's so much image building that they're doing through like the music videos. Like we talked a lot last week, and I'm sure we'll talk about them as we get into the track by track breakdown, but like the music videos do so much of that, because besides releasing music and then occasionally touring, which is something they only really get consistent about doing later in their career, but like the main way that we're engaging with them as a band like visually is through these music videos, and these music videos are so weird and so like abrasive and strange. We'll talk about the origin story of the Exmilitary music videos, but like it's just so striking in the way that it simultaneously is like, we're not going to give you any information, but we're also going to give you these glimpses of who the people that are behind this music in such a way that's going to make you like obsessed about it. But then we're also, like you're saying, going to be really hyper aware about how obsessed people are about it, and we're going to fuck with you. Like as we said last week, Death Grips are little stinkers. They love to they love to take the fact that people are obsessed with their music and like play that against their own fans, and also play that against people that are trying to follow them and decipher what they're doing. They have that kind of somewhat antagonistic relationship where they're constantly trying to push back, but they are also very much participating in it, and they are very much curating this very specific image that they want you to receive, even though they are also not really doing a lot to make clear like what you're supposed to take out of that and all that. And I think it is, you're right, it is really unique and is really hard to be replicated, specifically because now in like the full tilt internet age, it's kind of hard to generate like this kind of an organic buzz, because I think at this point like the hype cycle has like decreased so much that it's kind of hard for bands to have this kind of cult attitude around them in the same way. Also just because fandom on the internet has gotten progressively worse over the last decade, just like across the board. But also like there is something special to like this band existing in the pre sort of social media. I remember being exposed to Death Grips, I'm almost certain because someone I went to school with was like, you need to check that. Like it was talked about in the way that people talk about like the Blair Witch Project, like having like mass marketing, because people were like, you need to go see this movie, like word of mouth. Like I remember the Tachyon music video and the Death and the Guillotine music video were just like, at some point in your teen years, someone, maybe someone cooler than you, was like, I need to put you down and you need to watch this because this is going to blow your brain open. And it did. Like this album is not only insanely influential musically, but like just has a real psychological hold on the people that it was exposed to at the right age.
Yeah.
Well, let's just get into it. Let's talk about the record. So there's honestly, we went through the history last week, so there's not a whole lot to say that's new. Basically, they recorded the album in Sacramento after forming at the end of 2010. Very quickly came together, and although like, obviously there's the three core members. Obviously there's Andy, there's Zach, there's Stefan. Although like if you do some digging, there may be like other people that were involved at the same time, like Mexican girl, Liz Lyles Brown, I think. And there's someone else. I can't remember the name of the person, but whatever the case, as far as we know, the official story is Zach, Andy, Stefan came together, made this mixtape in Andy's studio throughout 2011. And boy, oh boy, is it just, not only just it, as we've stated throughout already, like this is a fucking amazing project. It's also a project where it's just like, I don't think we're ever going to get anything that sounds like this ever again. I just feel like this era, not only of just music, but just like of the internet itself, like just culturally, I don't know if anything like this could ever happen again. So let's just get into it. So track number 1, I mean, let's just fucking play it. Let's just play that goddamn intro that we all know and love.
He come to me with money in his hand. He offered me. I didn't ask him. I wasn't knocking someone's door down. I was running from that. When I got out, I was in that.
There's so many things that are great about the Charlie Manson speech, but I think just my favorite part about it is how it totally predicts everything that's going to happen with the Epic Records. Like starting your record career with this record company, I walked in and it's a bigger jail than the place I just got out of. Like it's so perfect how it exactly predicts like what's going to happen with them in Epic and No Love Deep Web and all of that stuff. And just like, it's one of the best introductions to a band ever, not just like the first songs of an album, but just like in 5 minutes we are going to introduce you to what this musical project is, what this album specifically is going to sound like, what this band is going to mean and stand for, and it's just also fucking great. Like the samples, this music video is so fucking good. Oh my god, I watched it again for the first time in a while today. It's like I think this, it might be my favorite of the 3 music videos, just in terms of like how they use that lo-fi, like scratchy, all of the like stuff that they overlay with the visuals of MC Ride out in the desert, running through the desert, standing on top of those trees and stuff. It's just so imposing and ominous with the way that they use that what's the sample on this one?
It's a Jane's Addiction song.
That's right. Oh my god, it's so funny that I don't really like Jane's Addiction, but this sample works so goddamn well.
And just like, god, this song, in like, basically, if anyone else was singing this song, they could not sell it whatsoever. It's so uniquely from Stefan, from Ride. Like, there's some lyrics here that, like, if anyone else sung these, or like out of context, you would think it's some cringy atheism bullshit. But because it's Stefan, he sells it, and you're like, this guy is fucking scary. Like, this guy has been through some fucking shit, and he scares me, but I'm also like completely engaged with him. Like, I think the Charles Manson sample is so perfect in so many ways. Like, one, obviously just like completely predicts their career arc up until like, the end of 2012, but also like of this like dangerous cult leader that has this grip, even despite how awful and terrible it is. He still has this grip. He's an enigma. It's like, even years later, he's still such a big part of our culture. I mean, there was fucking Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like, the story of the Manson still is engaging with, the American culture and world culture at large. And like, Death Grips is like creating their own mythology. I think this song like established that mythology of like, this is what our band is. This is what we're like. You're either in, you're out. And like, a lot of people said, "Oh, what? I'm in. For better or worse, I'm in."
Yeah,
but oh my god,
that's a good way to put it, especially when you think of Exmilitary from more of a conceptual standpoint, kind of as being, in many ways, I kind of call it Death Grips' version of the Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails, in like the way that they dig so deep into like the weirdest, darkest recesses of humanity. And it's just, you're right in that they just create this, I think that's a good way to put it, in which they kind of create their own mythology. And I think it definitely, I personally, as somebody who's like really into and involved with Southern rap, especially when you think of Memphis rap, a lot of the elements in this album really harken back to the mixtape culture of like late 90s, early, like just 90s in general, Memphis rap, and the mythology surrounding it, down to literal them thinking that these rappers were spawns of Satan, even going back to like Isham and all that stuff. And I think that Death Grips really took that into a modern age, and that's something that I don't think we've ever really seen before them in recent memory, and since, in which there is just so much mystery that for once actually felt sinister, as Jackie put it, kind of being like almost like the Blair Witch Project, in which you don't know if it's real or not.
Yeah, that's something that's always really fascinated me about MC Ride, and was something that was so, and like you were saying, what Maddie was saying, like about these lyrics and how like if you read them out on a piece of paper, a lot of times they can either be like corny or like overly like, he's really writerly for someone who is so like aggressive. Like there is a sort of high-mindedness to a lot of the lyrics, like especially on like songs like Beware, but also like it is so true that like the line between performance and reality is blurred in such a way where his energy is so raw and so real that like you really do believe what he's saying. And like, obviously I've been thinking a lot about DMX for the past week, who tragically passed away today. That we're recording this, as I said, on the day that Prince Philip and DMX passed away, which was just a weird way to start my day. It just what a 1-2 of different emotions happening at the same time today. But I've been thinking about and listening to DMX a lot this week, and like, obviously DMX is very influential on MC Ride because they both shout in like a similar sort of cadence, and like I'm sure that MC Ride is influenced by DMX in one way directly or another, but I think there are so many parallels between the two of them as I thought about it more and more, the way that they both are simultaneously building their mythology and building this kind of like character that they are playing, but there is something undeniably real and vulnerable in a way about like their pain and their frustration and the way that they're able to like translate this into art that ends up becoming so much more popular than you could ever imagine. Like the Death Grips obviously are not as popular as DMX was like commercially. Like DMX had songs that were like mega pop radio hits. But the thing that's insane about DMX is that DMX did not make pop radio hits by finding a way to filter DMX into a popular sound. Like he just made DMX songs that became the biggest songs in the world, and like he bent popular music to his will rather than changing what he did to fit into popular music. And in a similar way, like Death Grips is so different than everything else that is going on at the time that this comes out. Like in 2011, like I said it last week, like Passion Pit was enormous at this time. This is the peak of chill wave. This is like the beginning of Toro y Moi. Like this kind of abrasive, industrial, sample heavy rock, rap, punk sound is just like, it's so interesting that it just comes out of nowhere, so fully formed by these three guys coming together, because like there are obvious precedents. Like I think Nine Inch Nails is a great thing to bring up, because I think Nine Inch Nails is a really good example of like the other artist who most has been able to bring the industrial and the truly experimental sounds into popular music and have it become like a sort of cult object in a way. But I think that Exmilitary specifically, the way it blends that with then rap, and the way that he is able to take these samples from old rock and roll, from old reggae, to like all these like 1950s and 1960s rock samples and the Bad Brains samples and all of these old genres of music, and then is able to like imbue them with new life and energy and like urgency. And I think Beware is like the perfect example of that, the way it takes this Jane's Addiction song and a Charlie Manson, like whenever you read the samples of a Death Grips song, especially like all the samples on Exmilitary, if you go on Who Sampled and you look through them all, it's like such a weird collection of things to put together. And like, who would ever think to put these things together? But they all just, when you listen to Exmilitary, it all clicks and it all works together, and it's all so seamlessly woven that it just makes sense.
And to your point, I think also, just as speaking on the sample part, one thing that I've always really loved about Death Grips that I haven't heard in such a way from other artists that I listen to is how they use like people. It's like a whole entire meme that's been prominent since the band started, where everybody's like, nobody knows what he's saying, but it's fine. He's just a guy yelling. And instead, I see it as a very intentional thing, down to the samples, and whittling them down into the point of them being practically unrecognizable. And the way in which Death Grips, in many ways, is a reflection of whatever the listener decides to put on it. And I think that's, again, going back to the community, because I think the community is such a huge part of the band as a whole, in which how many people have such different interpretations of their music and their imagery, which I think they've definitely which I definitely ran with more and more over time. But yeah, especially like just seeing like how many queer people really love Death Grips and see so much of their own identities in it, or later in their later discography, the hints at a lot of very kind of like pro-black, black empowerment type stuff that a lot of people started to pick up on, and just the small political messages throughout it, or ones that people have kind of deciphered through these lyrics, which at first for most people, when I look at it, it just seems still unintelligible even with it on paper. And I think that's something that's really special and also very, very hard to do. And I think it speaks to their artistry. And in many ways, I feel like and I want to know what you guys think. If, let's say, if this came out now with all the other music staying the same, from like Atrocity Exhibition and Yeezus and all that stuff. Let's say like all the stuff that people see as like alternative rap since then came out. Do you think this would still have had the impact that it did?
I think so, and I think it would be even. I think it would be received differently, obviously, and I don't think it would be like regarded as like as important and influential as I think it is in certain circles. But I think like there's a lot of stuff on this album, and I think you were making a really great point talking about like how Death Grips was received originally and how it's been received over time, and that really does line up with like my own arc with Death Grips, where like when I first heard Death Grips, the primary thing, like the very first thing I latched onto was not the lyrics, even though I think MC Ride is like a genius lyricist. Like the first thing that happens with Death Grips is you feel it in your gut. Like you put on Guillotine, you put on Tachyon, and it's like a very visceral body experience. And so when you're dealing with music like that, when you first exposed to it, what's being sung over these very dense instrumentals is kind of secondary, and you're like, well, I can't even really make out exactly what it is he's yelling. I'm just kind of feeling it and feeling the music and all that. And then over time, like we've gotten more and more analytical, like you're talking about, as we're starting to read into. But like as I went back to this album, even though Death Grips are very much they're not political in an explicit sort of way. In fact, I think this album has the most explicitly political Death Grips song, which is Clink, because the political message of Clink is very simple. It's fuck cops. But like, besides that, for the most part, like the way that they communicate the politics of their music is it's not at all didactic. It is like, we are going to create this world that is reflective of the world you live in, but like twisted by paranoia and twisted by the way that the internet is warping our brains, and like it creates something that I think is very like intellectual, and you can really dive into it and dive into like the themes of what they're talking about. And as they go on, they get more and more personal. Like we'll get to the on GP stuff, but like first and foremost, it does kind of hit you like physically and viscerally. But then as I've gotten more into Death Grips over time, like there are all these layers to this music. And I think if this had come out now, like it wouldn't feel as crazy and groundbreaking the way it did at the time. But I think people would really latch onto it, because I think there still is a lot of stuff that like hasn't been repeated since, even by Death Grips themselves, that happens on this album that is just like one of one.
Yeah, basically the same. It's hard to say. Like, I do think that, like, would the record still be as great as it is? Like, yeah, no, like, this record has barely aged today. Like, it's, like, very much, obviously, like, of the early internet, but at the same time, it is, like, seemingly timeless. But also just, like, just the landscape of music media at the time, I don't think this would have been big, just because the landscape has changed so much, you know? But, like, I think even then, it's still stuff would power through, and the record would still be like really claimed. Like, I think you said everything pretty much perfectly. Like, this is a great record, and Beware, just one of the greatest fucking intros ever. And of course, that leads into track number 2, the big hit single, the big single. Radio stations all across America were playing this next song.
Oh, we're gonna say it 50 times. It's so funny that Epic Records signed them to a contract. It's just hilarious.
Oh my god! Like, so with the intro, where the entire intro is like, it's a Charles Manson sample, like degrading radio, like not great, degrading record labels, and then be like, oh yeah, let's sign this band. But again, that's a story for the next podcast. We're focusing on Exmilitary. We're channeling our energy. Next song on the album is Guillotine. It's one of the up until like maybe like Government Plates, and even then, like it's probably even still like one of their most like simplistic songs. Like in the mix, there's not a whole lot happening there. There's no like major samples or anything. Like it's just sort of like some simple drum beats and sort of like guillotine sound noises and like synth stuff, and then of course Ride, you know, providing this performance that you know, like that keeps drawing, like even despite the, you know, the same, like just the wall of sound that's up where, like even when you take that away, like Ride's presence is so overwhelming and so like, you know, it's a clockwork orange, your eyes are glued to the screen, your ears, the headphones have magically like it's like fucking Cronenberg body horror have like attached themselves to you. You can't take off your headphones, they are a part of you now when you're listening to this record. And then Guillotine is like the full confirmation of like that transformation happening, because even something as simple as this, like it's just, you're so drawn in and it's just like, what is this guy talking about? Like, but at the same time, you just feel the energy, you feel what's going on. And let's play a little bit of Guillotine real quick, because we know it, we love it, it's so goddamn good. Also the bass, the bass.
Yeah,
there's a video, I think it was in their Adult Swim segment they did in like 2012, where there's like a really like, basically it's just the song is playing off like car speakers, but the bass is turned all the way up, and you can't hear anything but the bass. Like it's so nutty.
They have some of the craziest sub bass sounds that like I've just ever heard in my entire life. Like which I think is one of the things that we talked a little bit about last week, but the way that they are able to combine real drums from Zach with sampled drums, like we'll get to the marching band samples that are all over this album, but like those are crazy. But then they also have all these synthetic drums that hit harder than like almost anyone else's production, and like the production on Guillotine is just ridiculous. I would not call the song overrated. Do not misconstrue me. I think that Tachyon is a better single than this song, and I like Tachyon more as like an individual song. But the thing about Guillotine is that the music video is so much of what creates its lasting staying power, I think. Because I mean, like, how many times have you, even if you're not like on the Death Grips corners of the internet, how many times have you seen that fucking picture of MC Ride grabbing his head with the static behind him in the car? Like it's just such a lasting image, and is, like we were talking about last week, like such a testament to the fact that they had like $3 to make these music videos. Like there is not a lot of production value going into them, but they're so creative with the visuals that like just MC Ride wrapping this car with the weird static imposed on the video and with the other things moving past the car in the background, like it's just unforgettable, and it adds to the impact that the song has for sure.
And I think going back to what you were saying about Zach's drums, it's so interesting how they are able to combine, as you said, these electronic elements with actual live music to the point where it's, the lines are completely blurred between what is real and what is not, between what is artificial and what is organic. And I think that's like the perfect way to describe them in so many ways, is teetering on that line and constantly making you question these things. Like in some ways, like you're being like gaslit by Death Grips.
It's very true. Like they are so good at using the studio as an instrument. Like I talked about this last week, I'm going to repeat a lot of points throughout this series, but they're so good at like understanding that like we need to use every single possible aspect of like producing this to try to add creative detail in the way that they'll have samples that will work their way throughout a piece, and then at the end of a song, like the sample will play out in full, and they will have all these moments where like they'll have the song cut out, or they'll have something introduce itself suddenly and like disrupt the live performance flow of the track. But yet at the same time, they're a band whose sound totally translates to live music, which seems like those two things. It seems like most of the time when you have a band like Talk or someone like that, where so much of what they're doing is like, I am working in the studio and I am elaborately assembling this like perfect artifact that cannot exist in real time and can only be constructed. And yet like this is a band where it's like they're immaculately constructing this thing that is in this gray area between synthetic and live and all of that, but yet they have figured out how to totally play these songs live and totally play them like it's a band, just a three-piece guys jamming on this thing. And it's that balance of simplicity and complexity. Like there aren't that many layers to Guillotine, yet every single one of those layers is so intense that it feels like a much bigger, more layered song than it is, because like every single element is hitting so hard, and the fact that it is so pared back allows that sub bass to really wallop you in the chest more, and allows MC Ride's performance to like really stand out more.
Exactly. And the noise section, which like for the longest time with this record, that was the hardest thing to like kind of see past this record, just that noise section at the end. But obviously now it fucking goes, and I think it's like a release of tension of like, there's already like, here's the song is already very angry, and it's already like a lot, but there's also like a lot they're kind of holding back a little bit. That little noise section just represents that like releasing of energy. It's like, okay, it's out of our system. And of course the rest of the record, there's not really into that there's some of that underlying tension throughout the rest of the record, but this is the only time where it's like they really do play with that, because obviously the next song in this fucking album is Spread Eagle Across the Block.
Yeah, from this point on the record is just like, I think the first two songs is trying to build a lot of kind of mysterious, ominous energy and really like submerge you in the Death Grips world. And then the rest of the album is like, we're going to blow your fucking doors off. Like we're going to go so hard, so abrasive. And then I think, yeah, like we were talking about last week, like there's so many green brick sound waves on Death Grips' discography, and Spread Eagle Across the Block, which we'll get to right now, is one of the great examples of that. It's just a song that is pure noise, pure in your face. Like my life was different after I first heard MC Ride sing "I fuck the music, I make it come, I fuck the music with my serpent tongue." Like there's a before and after that moment, and I think that you're totally right to indicate that like there's still a little bit of tension and unease to Guillotine that just gets then blown out of the water by the rest of the album, as it just sort of it shifts into an even higher gear from this point out.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna open up. I want to see just how fucking bad the Spread Eagle Across the Block like brick is. I want to see just how. It's all.
I can barely see daylight through the green. It's just.
Oh God, sorry. Okay, I'm not gonna play it off Audition, but like, folks, if you have Audition or Audacity, just pull up those audio files and just see just a wave. In Audacity, it's a wave of blue, and in Audition, it's just green. It's just green rectangles. There's no black. There's no daylight. It's all noise. But let's get into Spread Eagle Across the Block. Let's just fucking play that music, baby.
Spread Eagle across the block. I fuck the music, I make it curl. I fuck the music with my serpent curl. Hit.
Speaking to your point, Matt, about the whole the whole Clockwork Orange thing, it's funny because they use the Link Ray sample that is in Clockwork Orange that was like banned because they worried it would incite violence. And I think that's like the most perfect way to kind of really kick off almost like the sonic thesis of Death Grips in general. I feel like this song is a very apt way to describe that. And it feels like a lot of the samples itself are really intentional. Like, it tickles my heart. It makes me so happy to know like they use like the Beastie Boys "Fight for Your Right to Party" sample in it too, and I'm like, I don't know how to explain it, but both of those things, both the Link Ray and sample and this one, feel so intentional in what they were doing. Even if it's more so for themselves than for the average listener to be able to pick up on, which I think is like really funny.
Yeah, I think I discussed this last week on episode 0. We were talking about the Death Grips EP, but it feels like on this album especially, like some of the samples are very much like, there's a lot of samples on here from like an artist's like first album or like their first big single, and then or just like first like big eras in like rock and pop music. Like this obviously like great sample. Like I feel like this record in a lot of ways, it's them trying to take like rock music and pop music and hip hop music back to its origins as like just genuinely dangerous music of like, this is shit that's gonna scare your fucking parents. They will not let you listen to this. Like this will cause riots in the streets. Like this is what this album feels like to me. And like what this song especially is like, this is the calling of like, hey, let's fucking break some shit. Let's riot. It's so goddamn good. And just it like that's what makes Death Grips so like they're such an exciting band for some reasons, but it's the first band in so long that felt genuinely dangerous, because a lot of like the 2000s and popular rock music and definitely even worse than the 2010s was like rock music either being dead or just not even being dangerous anymore. It's just, you know, I love my butt rock, as we all know. I love butt rock, but butt rock is not dangerous. Butt rock isn't going to scare your mom. Butt rock was this commodification of rock music or like heavy music that your mom could like, and this is like, we're taking it all the way back. Like we're gonna scare the shit out of some people, and we do not care. You're either with us or you're against us. And also the song is just, it's so fucking funny. Like that's an underrated aspect of Death Grip, is that like, you know, they get this sort of reputation of being like these deeply serious artists, but like they're really fucking funny. And this song is fucking hilarious at times. I mean, like, I fuck the music, I make it come. I fuck the music with my serpent tongue. Like that's just fucking funny. It's awesome.
It's so great too, like what you're talking about, like how it's the perfect metaphor for what they're doing, like taking these songs that the way they're taking these old rock songs and like, I am going to take this thing that once was countercultural and once was like exciting and dangerous, and I am going to once again imbue it with that danger and energy again, like bringing it back to life. He fucks the music literally. Like it's incredible, and I think this is the greatest example of how when you listen to Rumble by Link Ray now, like it's a song that was revolutionary at the time and has been iterated. Now that sound of music has been iterated on and commodified so many times that like now when you listen to old 1950s rock music, you're just like, well, this is like my grandparents' music. Like this is boring, and they managed to take those classic staples. They managed to go back to Bad Brains, which we'll get to that sample, and they go back to all these other things and completely like give them an entirely new musical ecosystem to exist in that gives them a new context and a new feeling to them, and combining that with just the raw fucking energy of MC Ride is just, it's the best. It's like this magical alchemy.
I mean, couldn't have said it better. Jay, do you have any final thoughts on Swear to Go Across the Block?
I just want to say this is one of the...
Oh, hang on. I think you're muted.
There. I just want to say this is one of the songs I was looking through my notes. And again, speaking on what I was talking about earlier, in which they have this ability to be able to make people like create their own meanings and impose themselves onto it. But one thing that I always think of now is somebody said that this is a song about a fed up Vietnam vet dealing with PTSD, especially with like the first line saying like, want a beer, have no fear. It's like beer drinking Vietnam vet who gets absolutely tired of everything and then blows all of his money on drugs, hookers, and shoots somebody or something like that, which I think is like so interesting in the different contexts that people place these songs in. But I think especially Exmilitary, because in many ways, and it's not something I necessarily thought of before, in many ways Exmilitary is kind of one of the few albums, if not their only album, where there was a little bit more of a clear narrative compared to some others. I think No Love Deep Web is probably one of the others very early on in their career before they slowly became more and more abstract. And that's something that is a conversation for another day, in like kind of the disintegration of their musical style over time into near incomprehensibility on Year of the Snitch with a lot of like the gabber elements. But it's like just something so fascinating to me. Just how I like view Death Grips in many ways like one gigantic science experiment to see exactly what lengths people go through, and in some ways how stupid people can get when they just want to create some form of intimacy with a band that they love so much.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy. Well, after he's fucked the music, he's made it come, and now he's the lord of the game on the next song in the record, which obviously Springhouse Rock has the yeah from Five Year at the Party, and then Lord of the Game features a sample from Brass Monkey throughout, and then obviously the marching band sample. So let's just play a little bit of Lord of the Game right now, featuring Mexican Girl, who I believe, as far as the rumors go, is Liz Lyles Brown, who was a consistent collaborator of Zach and AD back in the Face Tat days. So let's just play that music, baby.
I love those marching band samples so much because they use them 3 times on this album, and it could be excessive, but like every single time they bring in the marching band drums, it's a different use of the sample. Like on this one, they're like so fast and like skittering, but then like on Tachyon, they're used to break up like those big slow synth bass hits, and like it's so funny to me that they just were like watching marching band drumline videos on YouTube, and they're like, we could just clip this and like throw it over our already complex drum patterns that we're doing, and for some reason it will totally work because I'm Zach Hill and I'm a genius. But yeah, this is where the album kind of picks up like its energy and momentum a little more too, because like you've got this and you've got like Through the Walls and stuff like that. It's a lot higher tempo and is like crazier and a little more manic in the energy. And I this is one that's grown on me a lot over time. I think like the way that the vocal sample works its way through, and like the Mexican Girl chorus where he's going back and forth with her, like it's really just a cool song.
God, and just the fact that like not many other artists have like sampled like marching band stuff is insane, because it's just like there's such an energy and like a specificness to them. It's just like, why aren't more artists like tapping into this? Like how is Zach Hill the only one who's like really tapping into that somehow?
Definitely. And yeah. I think this is one of the few songs in which, at least a little bit, especially in the beginning, but kind of just when you think of the title as a whole, it kind of refers one of the few instances in which Rye directly inserts himself into the hip-hop canon in so many ways, kind of directly talking about him and his skill. And it might just be me, but as somebody who listens to a lot of hip-hop, obviously, and the historical way in which a lot of, like, band in itself is so integrated in a lot of Black culture, I feel like, at least in my heart, I feel like in many ways it kind of lends itself hand in hand with that, as being one of the more, in many ways, traditional rap songs that they have on the whole entire album.
Which is then so funny because it's like one of the least traditionally rap like beats you could pick on the album. Like it is so like weird and experimental and like, but you're exactly right. Like it is one of he can do like the braggadocio typical rap frontman like thing, and it is really, really fun that like when he diverts from the kind of more esoteric like creeping hordes of people seizing power and like all the like high-minded stuff that he's talking about on Beware. It is really fun when he gets into the more kind of like traditional rap, like I'm the fucking best, I'm the greatest rapper, like that kind of like very generic, but the way that he does it is also of course completely unique from like any rapper you've ever heard before, and the way he brags is not at all like concurrent with any of the other kind of like, it's completely different than like Kanye or any of the like big rappers of the 2000s and like bragging about having this and that and like cars and things like that. There's nothing material about it. It's all just like pure raw energy, pure raw like expression of talent and expression of like fear and anger. But then it's just great. I really think that it's unbelievable how good his vocal performance and lyrical style and everything is just from the jump here. Like on this EP, it's all like together. And even though as his career goes on and as Death Grips continues, like he starts to vary his style, he starts to add in different flows, different cadences, different approaches that he takes. But like almost all of the tricks in his bag are like present on this mixtape. And it's just really special to see him get to flex all of that for the first time.
And then also, go ahead.
Just really quick, just speaking to that point, a lot of it also, while this is like kind of, as I said, one of the more traditional songs, it's really interesting how throughout a lot of their discography, Ride kind of, or Stefan, however you want to call them, in many ways poses himself as a very unreliable narrator. And a lot of it, as we talked about, they have such a very distinct sort of humor. And they're one of those bands where everything that they do, you can't tell if it's sincere or if it's a commentary in and of itself. And it's something that you see throughout their discography, where you can't help but wonder if this in itself is kind of a critique of with a lot of the themes within the song, with drug culture and with just him in itself, expressing. A lot of this album is very hypermasculine, probably the most hypermasculine of like everything that they've done, and how they kind of play with those themes throughout it. Like even in Year of the Snitch, Streaky is very much kind of their own weird version of a strip club song. In many ways, when I first came out, I was like, finally, a Death Grip song you could twerk to. But you could, but like part of it you can tell and you could feel like, I think this is exactly what they want me to think. And that's one thing I both love and hate about them, because it's like just me constantly questioning myself and if I'm right or wrong, which I think is the whole entire intention of it.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. And also like the outro lyrics are like some of my favorite lyrics of any Death Grip song, of, you know, like, and I think just like total thesis statement of the entire band. It's like genuinely uplifting of like, fuck where you're from, fuck where you're going, it's all about where you're at. And like that's perfect, because it's like at the same time they're a band that like early on their big thing was always forward momentum, pushing forward, and like that's what that like those last lyrics like represent, of like it's all about like where you're at, where like you can continue to go, like it's all about the present. You know, it's hard to think about the future, you just gotta keep pushing forward, and that's that. And this song is fucking incredible.
That's something that's come up that I was thinking about a lot with this whole album, like specifically with the chorus of Beware, the I close my eyes and seize it, I clench my fist and beat it, light my torch and burn it, I am the beast I worship. Like it's this very like he comes back to it a couple of times. It's like this very nihilistic but also very kind of freeing mindset that he's bringing to this whole album, where it's like, I am the beast I worship. I only have right now. I only have the present. I only have my physical form. I serve no masters. I serve no systems. I don't buy into a game that I think is going to reward me, because that gets back to the known for it chorus we'll get to, the make you feel like a hoe donut thing. Like it's this whole attitude of like, I am not going to buy into a system. I'm not going to conform to it. I am going to embrace just the self. And even though that's like all I have, that's scary that it's like, oh, you're all you have. You only have like your physical form and your present moment. But that's also liberating, because it's like, don't fucking worry about what happened. Don't worry about like where this is going. Just like live in the moment in that sort of way. And I think you're exactly right about that lyric specifically.
And there's a lot of push and pull throughout this album. I believe it's on, if it's on Guillotine, then it's on Spread Eagle Across the Block, where he has this small line talking about, it basically alludes to a god complex. And I think that's like one through line throughout this, as well as kind of just as like this nihilistic wrestling with the self and with one's impulses. And also, I think as a whole, just how, especially in music, this sort of idea that you have to be a martyr, which is very applicable to so many of the themes in the album, whether you want to think of it as somebody who is slowly devolving into their own disgusting self-pleasures and killing themselves, or even just as a more kind of philosophical way in which you question whether or not you have to save the world, you have to sacrifice yourself for something. And I think that is so poignant in many ways that and I think it's something that a theme that goes throughout their work. And I believe even like, I think it's on Lord of the Game or Spread Eagle Across the Block. Forgot. I suck with the lyrics, but he even talks about like, what if I don't enjoy doing it? Why should I keep doing it? And it's heartbreaking in itself, just especially with people feeling so constantly entitled to death grips as a whole, especially with their identities. And it's something that I think doesn't often get talked about, and is something that if I ever met them and they were able to tell me whatever it is that I wanted to know, that's one thing I'd like to know specifically, like how that impacts them. And as we said, this kind of predicts their whole entire career, and in many ways predicts their career, especially with the tumultuous relationship they've had with their fan base over the years.
Mm-hmm. I think that gets into a point. I made this point a couple weeks ago on Twitter about The Weeknd, about House of Balloons, about sort of like, this album obviously delves into like a lot of really, skeevy stuff. And, one of the games is like, why am I even doing, like, I don't even enjoy this. Like, what if I don't want to do this? And like the same goes like House of Balloons, where it's just like, I'm not enjoying any of this. Like all like sex and drugs and crime. Like, this is not fun. Like, I'm not enjoying this, but like post-recession America, it's just like, well, what the fuck else do I have here? Like, what else can I do here? Like, I have nothing else but these drugs and the sex and crime and stuff. So it's just like, I don't even care if I enjoy it. It's something. And I'd rather have something than just nothing. It's like, if I'm going to go out, I'll go out like this. But then sometimes like this album, but then you have like a song, like our next song, Tachyon, where, it's just like, crime is cool, sex rules, drugs are awesome, and it's Tachyon, Deathyon. I'm just gonna play it.
God, this song is so fucking good.
Oh god,
have you seen the YouTube video of the guy playing this on the? He's got like a giant inflatable ball.
Oh, the balloon thing?
Yes. It's some kind of like, it looks like a giant yoga ball that he has put MIDI pads on top of it, and he's playing it by slapping these MIDI pads that are on this giant inflatable ball, and it is very strange, but also exactly what I imagine lots of Death Grips fans doing with their free time. Like, it's so weird, and what this song does with just that synth bass and that snare, and then they bring in the marching band drum samples on the chorus, but just that synth bass note and that snare is like so driving, and MC Ride, he fucking hits that flow so well, and it's just like one of the most exhilarating and has one of the best early Death Grips hooks, obviously, ever. Like, Exmilitary is not nearly as like hooky and catchy as they managed to evolve into on the Money Store and stuff like that, but I think there are flashes on this first album of like, as much as they are very anti-commercial, like MC Ride can write a hook, and oh shit, I'm feeling it, Tachyon, like that just gets stuck in my head all the time, especially like listening to it so much in preparation for this. Like, it is insanely catchy for how abrasive and antagonistic it is at the same time, which is what we're talking about. It's like this constant balance of pushing you away and pulling you back in, and giving you one narrative and then giving you a contradictory narrative and making you question like the author's intentions and how much of this you're supposed to be able to trust. And like, it's so engaging to listen to in that way and question on an artistic level, but then also just to experience it as just like a raw fucking feeling and just to let it hit you and not really worry about it too much, like intellectually. Like, this song works on both of those levels just as well.
Mm-hmm. God, the fucking energy, like this song, like especially just there's so much energy that like just you were not hearing anywhere else in music at the time. Like, even because obviously at this point, like post dubstep was the big thing in electronic music, and so it was getting more chilled out and like less dance music, and obviously there was the EDM boom, but even the EDM boom wasn't this like you just didn't feel it in your bones like this.
Of course,
And
yeah, because like
also,
a lot of those EDM producers, it's like they're making stuff that is very visceral sonically, but is produced in such a way that is like lifeless. Like, and I think what we talked about last week, when you listen to the Death Grips EP and you compare it to when you compare the song that was on the Zach Hill EP that became Death Classic, and you listen to like what it's like listening to a Death Grip song without MC Ride and what it's like listening to it with him added on, it's like he is injecting so much of that energy. Like, so much of it comes from the way that his voice and his cadence just like activates some chemical ingredient like in the instrumental to make it that much more visceral and exciting.
mm-hmm. And obviously it just leads in the cut through instrumental, and the cut, it's one thing I definitely like. I think they try to, we're not gonna, I don't want to talk about the future records too much because we have like 9 more podcasts to go after this, but like the way that they're really like, they haven't really pulled out like, sort of these interludes like this. I think they tried to on Year the Snitch to mixed results, I would say, but again, that's a conversation for a podcast weeks from now. But like, just the way, like, this is probably their most cohesive record up until like Redacted on the Moon. Like,
it flows so well. And like I was talking about earlier, like the way that there will be like the way that the "you need to vibrate higher" sample comes in, and then and then at the end of the song the sample plays out in full, or like the way that the sample plays out at the end of Clink when he gets to the "you know what it's like to have your rights read to you." Like, the way that these little moments in between tracks and the interludes don't just feel like something they've just tacked on there. It feels like a natural extension. It feels very planned out and feels very like purposeful. And yeah, I think Cutthroat is a great example. The way that this song seamlessly goes into Cutthroat, and the way that Cutthroat manages to not just feel like a sonic diversion and feels like an extension of the idea that came before it, and a transition into the thing that comes after it.
Mm-hmm. And like, I just want to pull up a quote real quick from the Quietus interview that I think Andy did back in 2011, where like they asked him like, the overload that also plays into is what is an embarrassment of styles, the density of the sound, and the fact that the album plays like a radio broadcast, almost like a post-digital impossible crate digging session, with Andy saying it sounds like a broadcast because it is a broadcast. Like, it feels like you've dug into some kind of like pirate radio thing, and this is like a really planned out experience of like everything is going to go right into the next song. Like, there's no rough transitions. Like, this is like, we are broadcasting directly into your brain, the deep recesses, the primal desires that you don't want to, that you're scared to let out. Like, this is what this broadcast is. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Even if you think of just at the end of Tachyon, when it has that that Cuddy Ranks sample that is so recognizable, where it says 6 million ways to die, choose, and then immediately cuts right into Cutthroat and says choose death. And it, in many ways, it kind of reminds me of that It's Always Sunny episode where Mac's like, I'm going to save my dad. And then it goes to black and it shows Mac kills his dad. It kind of reminds me of that in so many ways, which again speaks to their humor. But also, it's kind of funny. Somebody should do this. If not, I'm somehow going to do it. In some ways, Exmilitary kind of follows this hero's journey, and right at the middle, in many ways, like, as I say, like, this is probably one of their most thought out conceptual albums with a bit more of a through line than some of their others. And this is like the part where they just literally abandon everything and say, fuck it, for like the whole rest of the album, which just devolves into complete debauchery, for lack of a better term. And like you said, it feels like a radio broadcast, and I guess because I just love the imagery on this album, especially thinking of the whole indoctrination aspect, which you often see, like, here talked about, especially throughout, like, it's almost like in many ways like an Orson Welles story on the radio that you tune in to listen to. And in many ways, Exmilitary is kind of that, starting with the cult leader saying something that, like, oh shit, I kind of agree with Charles Manson, and going to the broadcast progressively getting darker and darker and transmitting all these different messages, like, that you especially see with the 6 million ways to die, choose death, that kind of come together in some sort of way that you kind of piece together on your own in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, as you said, debauchery. Let's just get into the next song then. The next song, of course, being Clink, which, as we said, Death Grips, they don't get explicitly political too often in their music. This is like one of the few exceptions where it is. This entire song is fuck cops, cops suck, and like the Black Flag Rise Above sample is extremely poignant. So I'm just gonna play it. Oh, hang on, my volume is down. I love iTunes where it's like if I turn it ever so slightly down, it's all gone. But let's, goddamn, the sample of this, the Rise Above sample it's incorporated so goddamn well and so unique.
Yeah, the way that the Black Flag sample mixed with the third usage of the marching band drums and like the scratching and stuff like that, it's just so fucking good. And like you were talking about, feels like really taking hip hop back to this raw animalistic expression of like rage, and I mean, what better topic is there for that than the fuck the police? Like, it's taking it back to those NWA origins, but is also doing it in a way that is like completely unique and reinventing the wheel. And I think the main thing I appreciated listening to this today for the 1 millionth time is just how much I love MC Ride's ad-libs on this song. Woo! Yeah! Woo! He's just going the whole time, like, underneath his own vocals, and it adds so much just chaotic energy to the track. Also, obviously, this song it hits different in 2021, you know? Like, the Gang of Hayden Pigs, what do they do if they come for you? Ain't never done shit. Like, it resonates a little differently, you know? I mean, it's always been fuck cops, but, like, we all know that, like when I was 14 years old in 2011 or however old I was, like, Clink is a song that has resonated with me more and more over time for obvious reasons, and I think it is definitely one of my favorites on the album now.
This is my all-time favorite Death Grip song. That
hell yeah!
Every time I listen to it, it just combines everything I love as like a huge Black Flag fan and stuff, and obviously fuck cops all day, every day, and there's just something about one really funny thing that I need to bring up as somebody who has been very deeply embedded in the Death Grips community and has seen a wide range of fuckery. You guys would love this. Basically, so you know how in the beginning he says "minding my own business." People started to realize it kind of sounds like MC Ride saying "my mom is dead," which they somehow started to take as some weird subliminal message of Ride asking for help, like for his dead mom somehow, and people started to create like all these weird theories about it because of this one small misheard lyric. And it got to the point where every time I hear it, I hear that without even it kind of reminds me of that Tumblr post where it was like shoegaze, but every time you read shoegaze, instead you read it as fugazi, so instead shoegazi, and that's what I think of every single time I listen. And I hate it.
It is so, like, you've talked about a lot about how much people project their own narratives onto Death Grips, how much people try to be like, because it is so intentional and because there is so much like going on in the music artistically, intellectually, with the stuff that they're pulling from, and then the fact that they are not giving you a lot of the answers to these questions, like you were talking about, they know how you are going to receive this, and they know that by presenting themselves in this way, by presenting their music in this way, that they are going to get people to way overread into things, to take breadcrumbs and follow them to extremes that are completely like off base. And I think over time, as their career goes on, they become even more intentional about that, and they do that even more like whimsically to try to like fuck with their fans, and like you were talking about, like a social experiment, like see how far their fans are willing to go. But also, like, there's a reason why fans are that obsessive. It's because there really is so much actually packed into these songs, actually intentionally. It's like the Stanley Kubrick, like the Shining documentary people. It's like, okay, well, Stanley Kubrick definitely was trying to put very intentional small messages and details into his movie, and because we know that, there are all these people that then have taken that breadcrumb and have taken it to just like a complete extreme, where they're like, actually this movie tells us about how the moon landing actually happened, and actually it's about this, and Stanley Kubrick was trying to tell us the secret information through clues and stuff. And like, I think Death Grips really is the modern internet cultural version of that. Is like, it is as much like this thing that we are trying to decipher as much as it is like this really visceral, intense artistic experience.
Yeah, and just one small thing that I want to point out before we do whatever, just because this also fills me with a lot of joy. But toward the end of Clink, he says he refers to the cops as Penelope, and it's like what seems to be a movie that has left people's collective consciousness. It was like a cute little teen movie about a girl who has a pig nose, and it's like one of my favorite childhood movies. And it's so, there's just something so funny to me about them picking out this truly obscure film that's not even like some weird art house film or anything. Like Action Bronson like pulls out weirder, like obscure ones, but somehow this one feels different. And there's something so whimsical about him anyways. Or that's possibly just me thinking about like Stefan in all of his like tattooed glory, just sitting in front of the TV watching this cute little thing about a girl trying to find true love or whatever, so that she doesn't have to have a pig nose anymore. And then years later being like, I know what I'm going to reference.
It is really funny to imagine, like, I mean, we I think before we were talking about the picture of MC Ride next to Beyonce in that picture where they met, and it is just like, it's very funny imagining MC Ride going about his day-to-day life. It's very funny to imagine him watching any movie, like basically like engaging with culture. It's very funny to imagine him wearing a shirt in general. Like he exists so much as the artistic avatar he has turned himself into for Death Grips, that like remembering that Stefan is like a person and is not just this character that he has created is like something that is like important to do, because I think at a certain point, like, Death Grips fans sometimes do forget that these are just like people. They are just musicians. They are not like this alien life form that has come from another planet. Like, they are real people who exist in the world. And it is so funny, like you're saying, like whenever they do make a really pop cultural reference, it's because so much of what they're doing feels like it's existing in its completely own isolated universe, that like it's very funny to imagine MC Ride watching Penelope.
It's like, yeah, it's like when you see your teacher at a grocery store and you're like, you don't live at school. And it's like
MC
that in
Ride,
so many
you don't
ways.
live in the Tachyon video? You don't
they don't have him like as he's like not a hologram, or like they keep him in a cage and then they're like ready to perform and then they unlock it and he just like runs out with no shirt on, like, let's fucking do it. It's like it's so interesting. And it has to be one thing that I've always wondered, that I think is a question that you could write a whole entire book on it, is whether or not it was intentional for them to ever be so detached, because they had to have known at least part of the not necessarily the consequences, I would say, but like what would come of that. And I don't know if it's just something that they had intended from the beginning, or if by the end of it they realized we're too far gone now. If I, Stefan, decide to make an Instagram account and just post like any word whatsoever, people are gonna get set into a shit show because they can't divorce me from Death Grips in itself.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
And like, yeah, and there's been occasionally times where that has like, obviously like Zach and Andy are on Instagram, and I think Zach, up until like maybe 2014, 2015, like did like post like, you know, like actual like normal person updates and not like weird cryptic photographs. Like I remember in 2014 he said like, oh yeah, I'd like to work on another Hell album. That never happened, which I'm actually still pretty sad about, because I really do want there to be another Hella record at some point. But I mean, nevertheless, like, and I think actually I think it serves as an interesting little segue into the next song, Culture Shock, which, like, in short, you be on that damn phone. You be on that damn phone is what Culture Shock is all about. So I'm just gonna play a little bit. Also, the Bowie sample at the beginning is so fucking awesome. Like the way it just sort of like phases out. Like he's like, it sounds like he's like, you just pushed him off a cliff and he's screaming.
that is
And also the super glitchy sample that's like really reminiscent of like Face Melter is also fucking awesome. It's like they took the printer sample, but they actually like made it music. Like they're like, how do we take this printer sample that we use in this song, but like actually translate it into like my DAW? And I have not much to say on this track in particular, but it's like, even though it is just like, you be on that damn phone, it's just like, well, I mean, I do be on that damn phone. Like
he does have a point there. I just wanted to bring it up real quickly as a tangent, because I realized that we didn't really talk about this. As I was thinking about like MC Ride and like the kind of origins of the band and like what they were doing at that kind of early phase of their career, I think a certain amount of it is like intentional, but I think a lot of it just comes out of the like attitude that they had. And I remember we held off on this anecdote last week because we wanted to save it for when we were talking about Tachyon, but the Tachyon music video, which for those of you who haven't watched it recently, if you remember, the Tachyon music video opens with them in this gas mask where he's going through what looks like some sort of office building, and he walks into an office building and you hear someone go, hello, and then all of a sudden the track shuts on. I looked it up, and in an interview they talk about, so that was where Zach Hill was living. He was living in some industrial basement that was in a complex that was like below an office building. So one day when they were at his place, they were like, let's go upstairs and see if we can like get into the office building and like film us going in there. And the person who says hello is a real person who did not know who they were. And so they ran into someone, and like I think that really adds to like exactly what we're talking about how the line between reality and fiction is being blurred, and the line between their performances and their art, and like obvious, and the fact that like when you came across these videos with no cultural context around them, like they felt like something sinister. It really did feel like maybe they did break into an office building and kidnap some woman and put her in a tarp and like then wrap this thing into the camera and share it for the internet. Like there's something dangerous. And it always feels like when you're watching a Death Grips music video that you're like watching some live leak video that you're like not supposed to be seeing or something like that. Like, and I think that all ties into exactly what we're talking about like their very willful, like withholding of details. And I think a certain amount of that is just kind of natural. Like, I think it just sort of comes from the fact that they're like, we don't really want to like give a whole interview explaining all of our thought processes because we're just like not really that interested in it. And I think over time they realize that like, I think when they saw us being such lunatics about their music, they realized that the deliberate choice that they made to kind of just present the music as itself and present the videos as themselves and like not give a lot of context for the fans around them, they realized that has an inherent power. And I think over time, as their career goes on, they go from like doing it kind of accidentally just because that's the way that they do things versus like they start leaning into it more and more, I think, as it goes along.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, unless you had any thoughts, we're coming close to an hour and a half in, so we have like still like half
couple
the
songs
album
left. We can move on. Culture Shock is good. I think it's one of my least favorites on the album, but not because I think it serves its purpose pretty well in the track listing, and I really like how it segues into the next interlude track, 5D, like I talked about. Like the You Need to Vibrate Higher. The You Need to Vibrate Higher / the 5D sample is like it's the best use of text to speech in music history ever, I think. Like for whatever, it's hard to. Matty, what's your rebuttal? Go ahead.
I think it is not the best. Is it the second best? Probably yes. The first best is obviously Collapse and Appear by Little Ugly Mane. That remains, but
that's a good choice. I will allow it.
But yes, like the 5D sample, which I'll just play 5D right now. It sounds so fucking awesome, and it's hang on, the sound is off. Hang on, let me turn it up. There we go. Look how fucking awesome this sounds. Like the like obviously like later on they would actually release like instrumental stuff, and even then I still haven't feel like it tapped into like some of the instrumental stuff that's on this record of like really heavy sample usage and like just like a real rawness. Because I feel like the thing with a lot of their instrumental records, like Fashion Week and Interview 2016 and like other random stuff throughout the years, is that it's always like it's their cleaner side. It's their side where they're like, where it feels like there's like stuff that's missing, but like the instrumental stuff on this record, like nothing is missing. Like this stuff is fully formed and with a purpose. It also helps that it's really short. And of course, that leads in perfectly with fucking air horns and Through the Walls, which is probably one of the biggest bangers they've ever put out. Like, the song is just a fucking banger. And then this sample right here. Fucking.
Cool.
Oh, God. Aeropink comes right after. It doesn't even matter, because that Aeropink sample fucking rocks.
Yeah, this song is just... This is the moment when the album, like, goes insane, where you're just, like... Your expectations are already completely blown by the whole side A, which I think the side A of this record is definitely the stronger half of it. But like, I really like how as it goes along, like this record gets a lot more experimental with like this song and Known for It and Blood Creepin'. Like it gets weirder and weirder as it goes along, and like you're talking about, like it feels like you're becoming more and more submerged in like MC Ride's weird world as he is becoming like more and more subsumed by his animalistic like primal desires and stuff like that. And just this is a great song. It's just so funny to me always. Like the instrumental is so high energy but also kind of silly in a sort of demented carnival ride kind of way. Like it reminds me of, it feels like a kind of a proto version of Ain't It Funny by Danny Brown, the way it's like kind of whimsical, but in this completely warped, demented, fucked way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, part of me feels like, especially with the increased, more, like a lot less organic and a lot more electronic and synthetic sounds and themes that they bring throughout this, it kind of at least in my opinion, it really encapsulates the inherent awareness that they had at the time that they still have now with their presence on the internet. And I think toward the end of it, a lot of it seems to be in some way or another, as we talked about, like, you're always on that damn phone, kind of that commentary on technology in all of its interesting ways, and that kind of push and pull that we have, that I think Death Grips has done such a great job of wrestling with themselves over how much of it is a good thing and how much of it isn't. And I think just in general with a lot of the album, it's like, how much do you have to have of something before it ends up being bad? But how far along gone do you have to be before you don't even realize it at this point? Because I love the second half of this album just for how much fun it seems to be. Especially because it's like it feels really good. You could tell throughout everything exactly how much more fun, how more abstract it is with how much they decide to like step back in terms of like all these really heavy themes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's as I was saying, crime is awesome, drugs rule, sex is awesome. Like, I'm just having a ball here. Like, it's depraved, it's debauchery, but I'm having a blast, and hopefully you all at home are too. You, the listener, doing these drugs and having sex and doing crimes with me, MC Ride, and Zach Hill and Andy Morin. But no, this song fucking
Depiction
rocks.
equals endorsement. It's good.
It's good.
But it's, oh my god.
But then exactly they are so good at making it more kind of fun and freewheeling as it goes along. But also, depiction does not equal endorsement. Like, obviously the sound of this song is meant to be like, it is so fun to listen to and is such a banger, but also you can very much tell from the production choices that are being made that this is not meant to be like inviting in the way that, like, you were comparing this to House of Balloons, and that's an album that is more about like the seduction of these unhealthy lifestyle habits and how, like, yes, this is bad for me and I'm depressed still, but like, he really communicates like the allure of that kind of lifestyle. And this song feels like what being on a bad high is like it's just like overwhelming and like just a lot. And but then he's portraying in this way where it's like, yes, this is probably bad, but I'm so out of control that I'm just like letting myself subsume to these animal impulses.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember movies? Remember, like, movies were a thing? Like, you can go to a movie theater and see like new movies.
Oh yeah.
Like, this song reminds me, or really like on like this second half of the record, up until like probably like Blood Creeping, really, because Blood Creeping is like the shocking was like, oh god, what the fuck am I doing? But like, so like Uncut Gems, that comes out, and it's a movie about how addiction, or specifically like gambling addiction, just how it has completely ruined Howard Ratner's life to the point that he fucking dies for it. Like, he bets big, and even then, the biggest bet of his life that it hits, he fucking gets fucking, spoilers if you haven't seen Uncut Gems, he gets fucking domed in the head by a thug, like one of those fucking goons that his cousin hired, who's like loaning him money. And like, but obviously in Uncut Gems, it's a movie about like, hey, this shit is bad. Like, but at the same time, throughout the movie, you're like, damn, this life is like really shitty and rough, but like, it's kind of fun. Like, it's a fun ride.
It simultaneously is like a cautionary tale that is also very romantic about the very thing that is dooming him. Like, the fact that he is so like insistent on like, I am going to let my life be up to the fates of like basketball. like I am going to completely give up like my life and my wife and my family and all of this stuff in the pursuit of like this dangerous ideal. And like, I think you're absolutely right that like Exmilitary is a similar sort of arc where it's this person like just completely losing themselves to this thing. And in one hand you're like, well, this piece of art is very clearly like meant to warn us about the dangers of this, but the way that they are communicating how this thing is taking over them is so compelling that you like feel it taking over you, and you feel the power that like letting yourself over to these impulses can give you. Like it turns him into a beast in a bad way, in that it kind of removes him of part of his humanity, but it also makes him into like a literal beast. Like, and I think that the second half of that, like, I think you're exactly right that it is sort of like, there is the come down of blood creeping at the very end, but for the most part, it's like he's completely lost the plot. He's lost any sort of like Beware is a song that relative to the entire Death Grips filmography, he's pretty level-headed on Beware. He seems to be a lot like his delivery is a lot more straightforward. And even though it's like cult leader vibes, like he still feels like he's kind of in control of his life. And as this album goes on further and further, he loses that grip entirely.
And speaking of movies, one other parallel that I love to make when talking about this album is A Clockwork Orange, which I think is very intentional in many ways. And for those who have not watched A Clockwork Orange, essentially in its most basic, it tells of a delinquent who engages in what they call ultraviolence, which is a lot of what's depicted in Exmilitary bar sexual assault. And the way, and the whole entire film just wrestles with the debate over whether or not it is moral and whether it is effective to be able to kind of take the bad out of somebody through the use of medicine, whether it be psychology and therapy. In this case, it's making him averse to these things that once gave him so much joy to engage in. And I think there's so many parallels that can be made in Exmilitary, especially when you think of toward the end of the film, in which he realizes he's cured after all. And there's that ending scene where he's thinking about having sex with a girl in front of a crowd of people. And while he's fucking her, he's like, I'm cured. Look at me. And like the sheer joy on his face. And I feel like toward the end of this record, it kind of follows a very similar arc in that way of embracing it, but in a much different way, kind of as a critique on the failure of the system, whether it be the justice system through Clink or religion and all these things that try to make people good, and the realization that it is human nature.
And also, like, another one last parallel before we get to the next track, it also reminds me of the Eric Andre show skit where he's like, cops don't give a shit anymore, and he starts fucking barreling at the cop car. Then Hannibal, the cop, shows like, hey, what are you doing? That's some cool shit you're doing, and they both destroy the cop car. That's what listening to Ex-Military is like. It's just like you're seeing some wild shit, and like you think you're like, oh, I gotta stop this guy. We're like, well, no, he's doing some cool shit. Let's just get in on it, obviously, of course. Like, and also, like, I'll get into it a bit more when we actually talk about the track, but like Blake Crippen, like I described it as a come down. That's not really a come down per se. It's more of a withdrawal than a come down, because it's very intense. It's very like, this is the worst pain I've ever felt in my entire life. Like, what is going on? But we're not there yet. We're got two more tracks to go. Known for It, which was included on the Death Grips EP. So let's just play a little bit of that right now. And this song, I said, I understand where you say that side B is kind of weaker than side A, because this is like a great, like, here's an Ex-Military. It's great throughout, but obviously, like, this is like, it's a good song. It's a great song even, but it feels obviously a little less essential within the themes of the record. But it's still, there's a lot of really awesome sonic ideas that go on throughout this. And Ride, we talked about in the last episode, but this dude is spitting throughout this entire fucking record. Like, I feel like it really is underrated, like, how technically amazing, like, Riot is as a rapper. And he has these, like, really unique and creative flows and the way he's able to use his vocal cadence in really unique ways. Like, and this song is really, like, a really good case for that. Like, he's kind of going, like, there's a lot of different, like, cadences he's throwing at us and different kinds of flow and speeds, and he's able to, like, keep up with, like, the crazy soundscapes that, like, Andy and Zach have built.
Yeah. I remember when this album came out and when The Money Store came out, it arrived at a particular moment in hip hop discourse where I think a lot of people were very like antagonistic to this, right? Like I came from like hip hop heads back at the time, and like I remember a lot of my friends who were into rap music were like, I don't like Death Grips. That shit isn't rap. That's like punk. That's like experimental, whatever. That's like not for me. I very much remember the it was Mike Seatown and one of the other guys from Dead End Hip Hop doing a Money Store review, and the other guy being just like so completely bewildered by it, and like I think it was Mike B, or I forget which one of them it was, but it's so funny like how when this came out at the time, people in rap music were like, the sound of rap music was so different that a lot of people were like, okay, well, I'm not into that stuff, but then they were missing out on the fact that like he is such a fucking good rapper, and I think so much of what he's doing on here is inspirational for like what Danny is doing on Atrocity Exhibition, where he's like trying to prove that I can rap over even the most unconventional, seemingly inaccessible beat, and I can show you with my flow that I can like wrangle this song and like get it under my control. And that is exactly what he's doing all over Exmilitary, is just like these incredibly dense, incredibly loud, jam-packed songs that like they should overwhelm almost any vocalist. Like it should be too much going on, too cluttered, but that's one of the great gifts that MC Ride has. That is another thing that unites him with DMX, is like his voice is so bassy and so powerful and so like imposing that it cuts through the instrumental like a hot knife through butter. Like you just feel it no matter how much stuff is like going on around it.
Mm-hmm. And also like the more like electronic elements on this song, it just feels like decay. Like it just feels like they had some kind of synthesizer sound, and it just sounds like it's been like it's going like rigor mortis, you know? Like it's an amazing like just the sounds they're throwing out this record. Like I think like obviously on their more recent records they would really get more into like the more electronic sounds, and I think that's kind of where Death Grip started to fall off a little bit for me, where it's just like it was this perfect mesh of like sample based stuff and electronic stuff and live stuff. It was a really perfect balance, and I think they've kind of lost the plot over the years. With this record especially, like it's such a perfect balance of all these elements, and this song like really does, even if it's not one of my favorites on the record, it still like balances all those elements really well.
Yeah.
The other thing is that like I think there's like, despite like Zach Hill's reputation, there's not a lot of live drums on this record that aren't sampled. I think Through the Walls is like maybe one of the only examples of like actual live drums on the record. And this song was mostly, but even then, like I feel like the move to electronic drums, like it challenges Zach a little more. Like I can't just rely on my, like I really do got to think this stuff out. Like I can sort of like combine like my knowledge of like, you know, of drumming, because I've been doing this as a career for like 15 years or whatever at this point, but also tie it into like these sort of timbers and textures and really think this stuff out, where it's like I'm able to combine like the more primal aggression that I have in my drumming style, but also like kind of rein it in a little bit, and like obviously put on, you know, obviously in a more hip hop concept. And I think it's a beautiful mesh, and the sound just it's so special. Because again, I'll get more to it obviously when we wrap up, but like god damn, there's nothing that sounds like this record and really this band at large. And it's like it's simultaneously sad, but also like I don't know, I'm not sure if I would want anyone else to try to attempt to sound like this, but god damn. Jade, any thoughts on Unknown for it?
The only thing I will say, because you guys have already kind of said my point, but it definitely is like one of the more apparent sample-based songs. But even then, at least like looking through the Who Sampled page for this, it's still like shit I've never heard of in my whole entire life. Something like some very obscure kind of 80s or 70s like science fiction soundtrack or something like that. But I think as we were kind of talking about, it serves as a very interesting, I don't know if I would necessarily say appropriate, but I I want to know what you all think, especially with the subject matter that abruptly picks up with I Want It, I Need It. And
Oh God.
I want to know how you all feel, because on one hand, I appreciate it in the position that it's in, but on the other hand, I don't know. But then it feels intentional. I can't really express how I feel about it in words.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely like for me, it's becoming like easily my least favorite song on the record.
Really?
And it's not. I would say it's my least favorite, not totally because of like. For one, it's 6 minutes long, and I'm sorry, it does like fully like the length. I understand why it's this long because it is supposed to like signify this really long like it's this long ass bender that gets to a point of like it's not enjoyable, but also like.
There are 6 verses and 3 hooks. It is a long song, and definitely I think could have been streamlined a little bit. But I really like this song a lot personally.
I like the song. It's a lot of fun, but also like it is so goddamn long. And Death Grips can pull off really long songs sometimes, but like
usually when they do, there are like multiple movements. Like Inanimate Sensation is a long song, but that's also like 4 songs. This is 6 minutes of more or less the same thing.
Mm-hmm. It's repetitive, and it's a lot of fun. It's like it's clearly the most traditional like song that owes a lot to like the Beastie Boys. Like it's Death Grips to Beastie Boys, and that's a fun concept, and I think it mostly works. But again, Beastie Boys songs were never this fucking long. Like
that is true. I do just really love the Pink Floyd sample on this and the way it's flipped, and I also really do love the chorus of this, like the I want it, I need it to make me. It's so catchy and so like definitely like you said, like very Beastie Boys, very like early hip hop, and it is a little more traditional than everything else in the album, which I think also especially stands out at the point it is located in the album, because like we just got through the Walls and Known for It and 5D. Like you get through the most experimental stretch of the record, and then you get to this and it feels kind of straightforward by comparison. But I do really like it, and I really like how the like squelchy synthesizer that goes through all of it like totally contrasts with the Pink Floyd guitars, and like we're talking about like the synthetic and the new and the futuristic being just like side by side with like the old and the sampling and all of that stuff, and how it all comes together so seamlessly, I think has always just been really impressive to me.
One thing I will say, retracting on my earlier statement because I forgot about this song in regards to A Clockwork Orange, it does talk about sexual assault, and I think that's very interesting, again, with how, as I was talking about before, and this kind of feels like, to me at least, the kind of culmination of this very hyper masculine image that they build up throughout the whole entire album, that kind of culminates at this point in which it's very stereotypical in the way in which it represents a man who is genuinely unable to control his sexual desires into contemplating very unspeakable, disgusting things. And that's something I've always really respected about Death Grips, in which they are able to directly critique both the interpretations that people may have on themselves before others may have the chance to, and satirize it in such a way that sometimes makes people miss the point completely, which I think is a skill in itself, and is, again, speaks to their whole entire larger kind of ethos and experimentation of how they portray themselves and their lyricism and how they engage with their audience.
I also, while it's happening, I want to acknowledge that like this song has a couple of my favorite MC Ride lines ever. This whole album does in general, but specifically, I just want to shout out responsibility's cool, but there are more things in life, like getting your dick rode all fucking night. Like this song does a great job, exactly what you're saying, of like dealing with these serious topics and satirizing them, but also being like, there is something funny and like tongue-in-cheek to all of this that doesn't ever feel like it's like in bad taste, because it's intentionally in bad taste, if you know what I mean, like, if that makes any sense. Like, they're so intentionally creating this environment of like sleaziness and grossness that you never feel like they are just getting in it. It never feels edgelordy, which is a thing that we will talk about as this series goes on. Like, I think they sometimes get a reputation as being edgelordy because of the fan base that they over time cultivate, and the kinds of people who respond to Death Grips and be like, oh, this is what I like about Death Grips, is that they're edgy and whatever, and like that's very annoying. But like, I do think that they do have a way of like dealing with these very serious, very visceral topics with like a sense of humor that is very, very entertaining, but then doesn't feel like it's making a joke out of like the rawness and the viscerality out of what they're talking about. Like, it still feels serious and feels real, but also like they're fucking with you. They're making jokes, like they're making references to Penelope and stuff like that. I also really like the line, we could do this like an orgy in the bowels of hell, where every Lucy's hella horny and their pussies don't smell. It's so gross.
Oh god, like this song, like obviously beyond the lyrics, it does, like, this is Death Grips being like, we can write a pop song if we want to, and I feel like it's,
and then they'll really show us that
on Money
next,
Star,
yes, next album.
And then, but yeah, one of my favorite videos, because the thing with this album, we'll kind of get into it towards the end, sort of like what happened afterwards to this record. Like, and I think like bands had done this before, but like basically they dropped the entire stems of the album, like in Black Oogle. For here's everything, here's all the instrumentals, all the samples, all the vocals, and of course that's led to kind of this mashup culture that I think was already happening before Death Grips, like obviously, Danger Mouse and the Gray album, but really like, because obviously these internet, like, these DAWs and music editing stuff was becoming much more available, like really blew up, and Death Grips like really like fostered that, like, hey, like this is yours now, do what you want with it. And obviously that led to, like weirdly awesome mashups like the Macintosh Plus mashup, or videos like the one Spider-Man video of where he's like, Uncle Ben is like,
this guy Flash Thompson, he probably deserved what happened, but just because you can beat him up doesn't give you the right to. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Responsibility's cool, but there's more things in life, like getting your dick rode off fucking knife.
Right. I'll pick you up here at 10.
God, I kind of do hate how much of like memes have really invaded the fan base, but like sometimes it's fucking funny. It's really goddamn funny. But what is not so funny is the next song, and the final song on the record, Blood Creepin', which is in my view one of the most underrated Death Grips tracks. The fact that it's not discussed more thoroughly is kind of insane to me, because it's so fucking good and such a perfect outro to the record. Because as I said earlier, it feels like a withdrawal. It just feels like whatever high you were on, you're off of it, you're quitting cold turkey, and it is painful and it is awful and it fucking hurts, because there's some stuff on this song that just, it's horrifying. So I'm just gonna play it right now. And I love the like digital chimes it sounds like. I'm not sure the way to describe it, but I love the sounds on this.
The sonic texture of it is so unique, and this song especially feels very indicative of like the kind of more experimental electronic stuff they're going to get into. Like, this feels very Redacted on the Moon in a lot of ways. And then the it's so he can make a hook out of just yodeling. He's what a talent, what a guy.
It's in a record where MC Wright is very fucking aggressive throughout, this is like the most aggressive he's sounded on the record. Like the vocals are so blasted out on this. like either like just because of how hoarse he's like going, like screaming this stuff, or just like Zach and Andy like really pushing that up in the mix.
Oh yeah, it's definitely like really compressed. It kind of reminds me of like one of my favorite artists recently is Midwife, and one of my favorite things about what she does with her production is that like she does this very shoegazy pop music, and like she produces her vocals in like such a lo-fi way that like you constantly hear her straining against like the compression limits of the mixing, but in a way that sounds good instead of bad. And I think this song does that exactly, where it's like he's going so hard that like and they let his vocals sound kind of rough and like they're pushing into the red, and it has a very like unique artistic effect that I think works really well.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
I think it's really one thing I love with, because this is kind of in many ways is like the successor to Clink, in which Clink is all about fuck the cops, but at the end it implies that he possibly got locked up or something, and then at the end it's a very violent car chase where he's clearly running from the cops. And I love that little line within the hook where it's like, do what I say and you'll be fine. And I think it's one of the few instances in which it very much brings the narrator, whoever it is in this case, Ride, kind of back down to reality and makes it real. I keep bringing up very stupid references, but it's almost like that SpongeBob episode where Mrs. Puff is like freaking out. They're like running from the cops because SpongeBob is like speeding too fast, and then all of a sudden she wakes up, she's like, oh, I'm fine. And then you quickly realize, crap, I'm still in the car with him. And in many ways it kind of feels exactly like that, in which it kind of brings them down to reality and shows the real kind of nihilistic consequences of all the themes that they brought up throughout the album, and the very nihilistic way in which Ride kind of ends the whole entire track.
Mm-hmm. God, I'll see the as Jackie and I just have been repeating in our heads, like this song in particular, it's hard to like, I kind of get why it's so hard to talk about, because it's just like you just sort of take it in, and it's just such an overwhelming experience. And obviously I think it's a perfect setup for the Money Store of like these really like the Money Store obviously is known as like you know their pop album. But even then, I feel like it's also just like one of the more abrasive, and like just the mastering on that record is so fucking louder than anything on Exmilitary at some points. Goddamn, this song is so fucking good. I love this song so much. Perfect outro to a damn near perfect record. But before we wrap up, I guess, this episode and our final thoughts Exmilitary, let's briefly get into basically what was happening with this group between this record coming out and then their next record, The Money Store. So in the summer of 2011, they dropped a two song like cassette tape on, I want to say, I think a Death Bomb put it out, Live from Death Valley, which in my opinion has two of my favorite Death Grip songs, two of the most underrated songs in their catalog in my view. And they're both super short, super blast energy. I think like also perfectly sort of like kind of get into their more like experimental and more like abrasive side. Like it feels like the ones that Zach had a heavier hand in. Like it very much seems like this middle ground between like what Death Grips would end up becoming and also like his solo music. So I'll play the first one, Poser Killer, which
what was it called? It was released on Death Bomb Arc's Bandcamp page, and then they put out a cassette of it in 2016.
Oh yeah. God, I won't play too much of the song just because the topic at hand is the military, but this song fucking rocks.
Yeah, you sent them to me the other day, and they're both really, really, really good. It's crazy how they've literally never put out anything that isn't at least interesting. Like, we'll talk about other albums later in the series that maybe we like slightly less than other people like them, and there are certain albums that maybe are a little disappointing for us, or what, like, but they've never made anything that isn't, like, at the very least interesting, at the very least engaging, at the very least, like, unique. And like every single Zach Hill project and every Flatlander side project, like, they just, everything they touch is always going to be unique and boundary pushing in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. And I think like Levernick Valley, it's so fucking raw. It's the rawest thing they've ever put out. Like even Exmilitary, which Exmilitary is very raw. Like this, goddamn, this song, it's so goddamn good. But I'll pause. But they put that out in July, and then subsequently went on tour throughout various areas of USC, mostly near California. I think I told you this, Jackie, before the podcast. But there, I was looking at some like live sets from the ex-military era, and there was one live set that was recorded that like they just got, like, I think like they put a couple songs ex-military, and they got a Tachyon, and they had to like cut off the song like right at the beginning because a fucking electrical fire started in the venue.
Oh yeah.
And they had to shut down the show. And it's just like that's such a perfect metaphor for Death Grips. But they dropped Live from Death Valley, and then in September 2011 they put out a mysterious video on their YouTube channel called Black Google, which I think, like, the video for that, I think is my favorite Death Grips video. It's the most conceptually interesting visual material they've put out, where it's like not just based on the music, like it is like there's some kind of like eerie narrative going on, and obviously like using these 80s like like tape cameras that they would go on to use in Interview 2016, like that like specific era of like, you know, obviously people go VHS and like film, but I feel like that era of like tape in you know, sort of the throughout the 80s, I feel like that's an aesthetic that's not really used too often in music, really, or like just used like as like a visual sort of throwback. It's either VHS or film, and that tape is not really like seen. It's like only in like rare circumstances, like occasionally some music videos will have that, and like obviously like the first season of the Eric Andre show. But they put out Black Google, which is the stems for ex-military, and as I said, just feels like, you know, created this boom in like mashup culture, and I feel like a ton of artists since then have followed in those footsteps in putting out the stems for their record. Like Black Midi did it, 100 Gex did it, plenty of artists have done that now. It hasn't fully picked up in like for like mainstream artists, because like obviously, like, you know, if you're on a major label and you're a big pop artist, you don't want to put out your music for fucking free, basically. But nevertheless, they dropped Black Google, and then I think towards the end of 2011 or beginning 2012, they announced they got signed, and you think, okay, like maybe like, you know, like a big indie picked them up, like maybe like a 4AD or like a Jaguar, or like, you know, some, you know, some you know, big history label that has like some history hip hop. Like, no, fucking Epic Records picks them up for a deal. Their first record deal is a major label deal. And
I think what you pointed out about Death Grips is particular in the last episode about their particular rise is so true, because it's like they exist in this exact weird valley in between like old record industry culture and new record industry culture, where like in 2021 Death Grips would never get a major label contract because the major labels are just giving record contracts to TikTok people. Like, like, and then they also would never have gotten a contract 10 years earlier because there'd be way more like actual industry machinations that would prevent them from. They're exactly at this point where like things can get popular up on the internet on their own in a way that makes cult objects like able to materialize a lot quicker and allows people to really grab onto these things like very easily and quickly. But then also like the fact that they were able to get popular enough to sign to Epic Records and then immediately be like, wait, you mean now that we've signed this record contract, we're not allowed to do whatever we want whenever we want? Oh, fuck this. This is dumb. Yeah. Like it's just, it's not only so funny, like, I can't believe they thought this would work, and then just how quickly like it proceeded to immediately backfire in their faces in exactly the way that you would think it would, but also in a way that was completely unexpected, and we will get into a lot in the next 2 episodes of this podcast, I am sure.
Yes. But back to Exmilitary. What are our final thoughts on this record? Jade, I'll let you go first as our guest.
Hi. Well, you guys already said a lot of what I was going to say, but one thing that I want to encourage everybody who listens to this to check out if they enjoy this, because again, as somebody who's a very big Nine Inch Nails fan, there's a lot of parallels with the rollout and everything for Year Zero, Nine Inch Nails' album, which is very underrated, and Exmilitary, down to even releasing the stems for free. And I think the way in which they did it is very much a fuck you, because they had to have known, I'm pretty sure they did, with how sample heavy it is, because this album is mixtape, whatever you want to call it, is notorious for being taken off streaming because of how many samples they have. And even the Bowie sample in and of itself, it doesn't matter how successful Death Grips is going to be, they are not going to be able to clear that Bowie sample alone, along with all the others that they have. And there's definitely a lot of parallels to be had between Year Zero, which is one of my favorite albums in this. So I highly encourage people to check it out. But I think also just as a whole, Exmilitary, it very much is, I think, a thesis statement, or at the very least an abstract. I think an abstract is a much better way to put it for Death Grips as a whole. And they acknowledge themselves pretty early on as a very ever-evolving project that will take on many different forms. And I think one thing that they kind of try to teach people very early on is to not set up these expectations for them. But of course, with the nature of the internet and everything, it kind of inevitably still led people to constantly expect all these different things. And I think with Death Grips, they do such a great job of turning every little thing on its own head to the listener, as I said before, as a mirror for their own psyche. And that is something that is truly, truly remarkable. And the way in which they have kind of set this precedent for so many different artists that exist primarily within a digital space is amazing. Although by setting a precedent doesn't necessarily mean it is very easily achievable. And I do not really know of any other people who have been able to craft and keep, which is the big thing, keep such a persona, or I guess in many ways lack thereof, throughout their music. And yeah, this is just, it's a killer record through and through. And I think as throughout our whole entire conversation, it kind of shows the multiplicity within Death Grips, and how even within the next listen, there are completely different themes that can be taken out of it, which is, as I keep saying, just because it's so amazing, it's beautiful. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think you said it best. I mean, my final thoughts on this record is just like, this record was a fucking event. Like, it is one of the most, like, when we talk about the records that define the 2010s, like, this record is that. Like, it changed music. It changed the way that we listen to music. It changed the way that artists put out music. You know, changed so much about how, like, internet music culture. It changed internet music culture. Like, it's instantly impacted by this record, and obviously Money Store and No Love Deep Web. But like, this record was like I wasn't here. I wasn't at the time. Like, I was fully on the Death Grip, or on the Odd Future train. So like, I didn't get into Death Grips until like No Love Deep Web. So like, that's when I got in. But even then, just like thinking back at the time, but just like looking back at like stuff, you know, archive.org and other things and articles at the time, it really was just like, this band was really something special, and everyone instantly knew, like, this band is something. Like, they're gonna be one of these bands that define the decade. And like we look like fucking, you know, Full Moon, to go back to episode 0, Full Moon Death Classic, like, they called, they called their own shot right away of like, this is gonna be classic. Like, this is gonna be defining music for the rest of the decade. Like, knowing that like, this shit is not only going to be like completely like not only just like great, but like this is going to change music forever, both on like just pure music level, but also just like culturally and just like marketing wise. Like just it completely changed the game. And like this record, for all of its merits, is just this great project of music culturally. And it's just it's an insane record. I love it so much, and I'm so excited to dig more into this band.
Hell yeah. I don't have much to say closing thoughts wise. We've already talked quite a bit about this album, but I do just think that everything you guys are saying is totally right. Like, this album is so influential to the point that it can then get taken too far, where, like, especially for people that are our age and are on the internet, like, there is a bad habit that many people have, that I myself have been guilty of, where, like, anytime someone does something weird or abrasive or industrial, people are like, this is kind of like Death Grips, even when it really isn't like Death Grips at all. Like, Maddie and I, before this podcast, were talking about the new Spirit of the Beehive album, which is really, really great. But a lot of people are just like, oh, this is like Death Grips because it's kind of post-genre and kind of abrasive and kind of weird. But even though, like, Death Grips is not the comparison you should make for that Spirit of the Beehive album, like, I think it sounds a lot more like OPN than it does like Death Grips. But, like, at the same time, if Spirit of the Beehive told me, yeah, we were really inspired by Death Grips while we were making Entertainment Death, I would say sure. Because that's the thing, is that, like, so many people, both people that you would totally expect, like, oh, of course Black Midi are really into Death Grips, but then there will be lots of people that, like, you would never expect are really into Death Grips that, like, took something from them. Or people like the fact that Beyonce adopted the Death Grips surprise drop model, and the way that, like, all of the way that their choices that they make on this album and their stylistic influence, it's not just the stuff that directly influence. It's like, this album has ripples that you can track 5 years into the future, a full 10 years in the future, now that we're at the 10-year anniversary of this album, that, like, it really is important. And I think this band is very important, and I am, as you said, so excited to get into all the lore, all the twists and turns that their career takes. And I mean, but, like, it's all here right at the beginning. Like, Exmilitary really does lay out so much of what to expect, what not to expect, that we still expected anyways, and, like, just generally setting up, like, it is a perfect crash course for the band that simultaneously, like, introduces you to all the core musical ideas of their career, while also leaving so much more room to experiment and grow that, like, I don't think we even could have expected from this first album.
Yeah. Like, if there's any final thought I have, like, on not just this record, just like this series as large as we dive in, like, I feel like over the past couple of years, I do feel like critics and publications have really downplayed the influence of Death Grips on just sort of like how, just the music sphere. And I want this series to just really indicate, like, this band is hella influential in so many ways. Just because they pissed off music critics back in the the early, the mid 2010s, for either justifiable reasons or not so justifiable reasons, like, I feel like they've been sort of, over the past couple years, have been like, they've still gotten coverage obviously, but I feel like their impact has been sort of like downplayed in recent years. And it's just like, and I really want to stress this throughout the rest of the series, like, even in the stuff that's not so good, it's like, this band is really fucking important to the music culture of the 2010s and coming into the 2020s also. So that's what I hope this series achieves, is that it really does, like, fully state, like, why this band is so important, not just on, like, a personal level to me, because I think their music is just, it's insanely important to me just as a music listener. It's grown my taste so much, but just, like, at large, like, how many goddamn bands love Death Grips, and how many people, like, were impacted by this record and subsequent Death Grips records in their, like, early peak period. So that's all I gotta say. Jade, thank you once again for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug before you head out?
Read Pace Magazine.
Yep.
I'm working there, and I love it there, and I'm trying to get a lot more weird stuff in, like, especially, like, a lot of hip hop, which is very near and dear to my heart. And stay tuned for some great surprises on there from Matt, me, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, because we're recording this in advance. I think by the time this podcast is out, I think my piece ranking the Death Grips album should be out on pace by the time this podcast is out, or pretty damn close. So be on the lookout for that. You get to hear my hot takes, which like it would have been nice to save them for the end of the series, but it's like if some place is willing to allow me to go off, I'm gonna go off a little bit.
I'm really excited to see how my rankings change, because I've kind of done a pre-series rankings, and I feel like, as is the case with my Death Grips rankings, they are constantly changing, and so I'm sure by the time I'm done like re-listening and talking about every single one of them, my rankings will be a little different. So that'll be fun to. I'm sure at the end of the series we'll go through and we'll talk about how we feel about how they all stack up. But yeah, really excited happy to have you on, Jade. It was a lot of fun, and I'm so excited to get into the rest of this series.
So yeah, that'll do it for us. We will see you all next week as we dive into the money store. So we'll see you all then.
Can't wait.
We'll see you all then, and bye-bye.
Fuck up.